So while everyone's trickling in, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining for the morning sessions. We heard from Microsoft, we heard from Riskified, which was a cybersecurity company which handles the likes of Gucci and their online commerce. We heard from Sir Ronald Cohen, which was certainly the most intimidating interview I've ever done. We had a little lunch break, and now we're back with Michael Eisenberg. Michael Eisenberg is the co-founder of Aleph VC, which is definitely one of the most impressive venture capital firms I've ever read about. And he is such a pioneer to me in the industry and also in Israeli VC. I'll let him brag about himself as much as possible. And I know that we have so many people joining the call who aren't necessarily, they weren't planning on joining the Israel Trek. They don't necessarily have an interest in Israel specifically, but they love your work and they love Aleph. And so that's what brought them on the Trek today. And so without further ado, I do want to recognize that we have a few members of iTrek on the line. They are the organization that helped us organize both the in-person Trek and the digital Trek. And so we have the CEO and Tomer and Rebecca. And so I just wanted to say a special thank you to them for joining us again. So without further ado, Michael, I'll let you take it away. And if anyone has any questions, please put them in the chat. You can ask them in real time and he'll get to them whenever he's ready. Talk to you soon. And Michael, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Kayla. And thank you all for tuning in. Especially Tom, who I think we woke up from his slumber over there, and his beer. Following Sir Ronald Cohen might be the most intimidating thing ever. I sit on a board of a company with Sir Ronald, and he's just the most insightful, thoughtful person maybe I know outside of my mom. And so that's intimidating. I was going to talk about Israeli venture capital, which I'll get to, and I'm sure Sir Ronald talked to you about social impact, which Kayla told me was important. But before I get to those, I want to weigh in on current events with permission. I'll start by saying that the shirt I'm wearing is very, very retro. I put it on today, not just for this, but for a couple of other Zoom, because most people were doing like these really cool backgrounds and stuff, and I wanted to feel kind of back to happier, more call it calm times. So I searched deep in my closet for a shirt I owned in high school some 35 years ago, and yanked it out as a way to remind myself. And thankfully, I can still fit into it. And the reason it's relevant, and I decided to put it on, has something to do with something Kayla said to me before y'all came on. She said that everyone for their thesis has to do something and looking at some sort of UN policy around this and around what's going on. And when I think about my shirt from high school and the United Nations, I think about the same thing, which is they're all too old and not relevant anymore, not fashionable anymore for the challenges that we have. And I'm looking at people on this chat, probably from all over the world, come from different countries, certainly different background. And I think the one thing that COVID-19 has taught us so far, actually I think it's taught us two things, but I'll start with the first one, is we're not only all connected, but we're all entangled. That is something that happens in one part of the world very quickly impacts somewhere else in the world. This is not a globalization rant or a put up the borders rant. It's just a fact of life, which is a virus that starts in Wuhan can topple New York City in a matter of a couple of months. One that spreads on planes, because we all travel and people travel. And even if, Tom over here didn't travel or leave his hammock, other people traveled and got near him. So whether we like it or not, in this global world, we are entangled. And our institutions not only are ineffective, that goes without saying, but they actually don't have this notion of entanglement front and center. They have a notion of partnership, will kind of hang nearby each other. But we have no institutions, national or global, that have adapted or adopted to this notion that what happens in Wuhan happens in New York pretty soon after. And the same thing is not just true for a virus, it's actually true for business. I've now set up a task force as of 8 days ago, sorry, it feels like 8 weeks, 8 days ago, to try to figure out how we get Israel back to work. And when I say back to work, I don't mean like this notion of red zones and green zones and we'll trickle people back, et cetera. But what industries have gone away and are not coming back and we shouldn't spend our time and money on versus where should we be investing for the future? How do we think about resilience? One of the things we've learned here is that the global supply chain and work is so finely tuned for efficiency that when you pull something out, it all stops. We have essentially built a very cost-effective, highly efficient system that has no resilience built into the system, right? Everyone's gone to China for masks. Everyone who needs pharmaceuticals needs to go to China for a bunch of the ingredients for those new drugs or the existing drugs and pharmaceuticals. And we have no resilience. You know, just today, Oregon is sending ventilators to New York. We're short masks and ventilators in Israel. And I got to bet that other countries are. This is a non-resilient economy, a non-resilient supply chain. And part of the reason is we've been measuring the wrong things. And I think when the history of this period is written, and I don't mean this period, these last 12 weeks, I mean this period, these last 30 years since my shirt was last in fashion, what they're going to write about is when you measure the wrong things, you build a highly vulnerable system. And I think what we're living through right now is the effects of what is a highly vulnerable system. It's very fragile, and B, one that has chosen by choice or by dint of history to be integrated and has become entangled, but has not been built with institutions that know how to manage that entanglement for the betterment of humanity. And that is what has come under assault right now by a little virus that we can't see. And it's the enemy in our system that belongs to all of us, no matter where we are in the world, no matter what we believe in, and no matter whether we want it or not. And I think that, to me, is not just sobering, but is a challenge. And that challenge is, what is our younger generation going to do about this? And despite a shirt of 35 years, I still consider myself young. And what are we going to do to build different institutions, different supply chains, different ways of doing business, different employment methodologies that are more resilient to do this? And just to finish off this part, in the 8 days we've had since we launched this project to put Israel back to work, we've looked at different measurements, right? I've always thought GDP is a crappy measurement of society, primarily because it doesn't measure many digital goods properly. But it doesn't measure services, which is the vast majority of the economy that's been hit here properly. But it's a measure of productivity, not of resilience, and not of human benefit. Okay, if we've got 6 million people out of work in the United States, I don't know what the GDP hit is, but I'm pretty certain that the human hit is larger, and therefore the hit going down the road to economies, psychologies, and everything else is large. And one last comment on this: I was on the phone with Dan Ariely, the behavioral economist who's part of our task force, and he told me that in most Western democracies, domestic violence is up 40% since this thing started. 40%. Measure that in GDP, right? It's 40%. And no one's talking about it. It's uncomfortable. It's this, that, the other. But it's not just a human toll. It's also an economic toll at the end of the day. And I don't say that to belittle the human toll. I say that to put it in terms that people ought to be quantifying, but we don't, because it's not a part of GDP. It's a big deal. By the way, in France, it's higher than that, for what it's worth. So anyway, with that as an introduction, I'll dive into Israeli venture capital, which is what you were supposed to come to my office to hear about. Before Corona took over most of our lives. So the first thing I'll say is that if you're all in your MBA program right now, you're all pretty lucky, because that means you'll get out on the other side of this thing, hopefully, even if it takes a year or two, rather than being employed right now and going through this as an employee. The other thing is, I think it gives you some perspective as to where innovation could possibly be helpful in the new world that will be created after this. And I'm going to take a step back and try to compress 70 years or 80 years of Israeli economic history into 3 minutes, and then talk about kind of what our approach is. So as you hear from my accent, I'm not originally Israeli. I grew up in New York. I moved to Israel 26 years ago. I was inspired by a rabbi, of all things, to create 10,000 jobs. And that became my life goal, how to create 10,000 jobs of what he called an honest and decent living. And by the way, one of the titles of our measurements is called the honest and decent living measurement. It includes a resilience factor in it. And I moved to Israel 26 years ago, right after I got out of college, started in political consulting, and then one bizarre thing led to another, and I ended up in venture capital, and I've been doing this for 25 years. The Israeli economy, which was an economy started in the pre-state days. Israel was founded in 1948. Started as an agricultural economy. I'm fond of telling the story. We talked about the UN to start and how dysfunctional they are now. Nothing's changed. In the 1950s, the UN came to Israel and said, don't bring too many people here, depending on which account you believe. There'll never be more than 600,000 to 2 million people between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. We don't have enough water to feed more people than that. Well, depending on how you count, there's about 13 million people between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River right now, so the UN was painfully wrong. And the reason is that the pioneers of this country took a look around and said, hey, we can make a lot from a little. So they figured out ways to get more efficient with water, and that became a national plan. So drip irrigation was invented here. Unique water conserving crops were invented here. And that was the beginning of the Israeli economy. In a place where the UN said there wasn't enough water, they started to export orange water, because fruits are mostly made of water. They started exporting oranges and grapefruits and other citrus fruits, and that went out with the water. You fast forward a little bit, as Israel got good at doing well with a little, they started to operate construction companies in low resource environments like Africa, which was a big part of the 1960s. And then as the various wars hit in 67 and 73, there was a feeling that Israel needed its own military industries, and they began investing heavily in military technologies. And again, almost like kludging together things, Israel became a world innovator in weaponry. You fast forward that a little bit, and in the late 80s, early 90s, Israel, well, originally late 80s, decided it needed its own fighter jet. Why a country of at the time 3.5 or 4 million people decided it would build its own fighter jet is, I guess, for some reason they thought they could live here without water. It was a terrible idea that turned into a great idea, because the project failed. It's like the patient died, but the surgery succeeded. The fighter jet failed, but they had trained so many engineers at the far edge of what was possible technologically on this thing called the Lavi fighter jet, that all this great talent that had been trained at the bleeding edge spilled into the system. The military became more technologically innovative. And then you started to get these early tech companies. Checkpoint, which is an early tech company, the pioneer in internet security with the firewall. Voice over IP was developed in Israel. We're all now using in one form or another by a company called Vocaltech. Instant messaging, which we're all now kind of living on, by a company called ICQ. And all that is the same thing I talked about with the oranges, is how you get a lot for a little, right? Which is you had very thin bandwidth lines, but you could squeeze voice over messaging in an asynchronous manner over it. And that was kind of the same ethos. And those were the early technology companies. Technology products went out, got sold internationally. But it was tough, though, for people with funny accents to go sell in Western markets. That was tougher. And the internet, I like to say, saved Israel, because there's this famous New Yorker cartoon going back to the mid-90s, which shows a dog sitting behind a computer and says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. So when online marketing took off, Israelis got really, really good at online marketing. And you started to get initially like nefarious industries like gambling and binary options and other not so happy industries. But ultimately, as those things, they got really good at those things because they tend to train your skills really well. Then move that to more better industries like SaaS, et cetera, and enabled Israel to come to the forefront of digital marketing of technology products and services. And then to kind of fast forward this a little more, now in Tel Aviv, you're running entire service businesses from online. So the fastest growing insurance company in the United States and now in Europe is started in Tel Aviv. It's called Lemonade. Anyone ever heard of Lemonade? You can nod your head if you've heard of Lemonade. And so no one ever thought you could run an insurance business from Tel Aviv 10 years ago. And Nexar, which sees most of the United States roads every day, is run from Tel Aviv. In fact, they've got this unbelievable kind of virtual CCTV of New York, San Francisco, Las Vegas, as it's gone from being very full to where it is right now, which is stunning. You can see images of New York all day through the Uber cars that are still running around there. And that's all run from Tel Aviv. So you can run these virtual services from Tel Aviv. And to kind of complete the story, Israeli culture has become hot. And I will explain this to you. You may not realize it, but it's true. So WeWork, despite what you read in the headlines, still has a huge number of members at it, like many, many hundreds of thousands. It's a capitalist kibbutz notion. We all kind of want to be together at work and see each other, etc. Hottest restaurants in London and New York, Israeli chefs. Fauda, for those of you who've seen it, has become Israeli television. So culturally, whatever's gone on in Israel has become hot. I don't know why that is. So we've gone kind of from this, shipping water out that we didn't have, getting a lot from a little, to doing the same thing technologically with military technologies, the fighter jet, the checkpoint firewall, squeezing voice over IP through narrow bandwidth channels, to running services businesses online, to now exporting culture. And that's kind of the history of Israel. I promised 3 minutes, so that was probably 7. So I apologize for that. And that's, I think, the history of Israel. I'll pause for a second to see if there are any questions before I go on. I can talk like forever, so feel free to stop.
Can you explain to the group what a kibbutz is and how it relates to the agricultural roots you talked about and WeWork?
Sure. So a kibbutz was an Israeli socialist idea. So the early Zionist pioneers to Israel established these collectives, almost communist, but definitely socialist collectives, where people would come work on farms and they would share all of the bounty. Or, as my partner likes to say, one of the things that kibbutz proved is that if you have nothing, you can share everything, because most of them weren't terribly successful economically. And people, by the way, from all over the world, you can look this up, came from and volunteered on these kibbutzes. Lots of Swedes, for some reason, I don't know why, Germans, and people from all over the world came to volunteer on these kibbutzes. There was a notion that kind of society was open inside the kibbutz, all for one and one for all. And WeWork was kind of framed because it had these glass windows and everyone was supposed to come and support each other. It's kind of the same idea.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? If you have any specific geopolitical questions, there is the recording with Miri Eisen that you can watch in your digital welcome packet, and also the Geography Now Israel summary. But anything specifically to what Michael said, please feel free to chime in now. Okay, I think we're good. Michael, take it away again.
Yeah, so now being more specific about Aleph. So we formed Aleph now 6 or so years ago. As I said, I've been at this for 25 or so years. Aleph is an equal partnership from day one. So started by my partner, Eden Shochat, and I. And then 3 years ago, we added a third partner. He was 26 at the time, a guy named Aaron Rosenson, who we moved from New York and Chicago to Tel Aviv. So we're 3 partners right now. And we started the firm in 2013. We went out and told our LPs, our limited partners, our investors, that what we wanted to do was build a different kind of firm, one that would take advantage of giant technology shifts that we sensed were occurring and that were similar to the shifts that occurred in the mid-90s when my former firm, Benchmark Capital, was founded. And in the mid-90s, the internet came about, and we believe that today, machine vision, machine learning, AI, these are all now buzzwords, but in 2012 and 13, they were a lot less obvious. Were coming about and that they were going to transform every industry under the sun. And we still believe that to be true. We continue to invest behind that thesis. We also believed, and I've written a book about this, it came out in Hebrew, I'm working on the English translation right now, that brands were changing, and that people, to the point I'm sure you heard from Sir Ronald, people wanted to identify with their brands on a human and humanity level, and not just on a call it advertise the hell out of you level. And so we've been building and investing in companies like Lemonade, which have a humanity first perspective. I wrote a blog post probably a couple of years ago right now entitled Long Humanity as an investment thesis, where I think it's kind of odd to say this as we're all looking at each other on Zoom, where shaking hands, hugging, and taking care of people actually mattered. We should go from tree hugging to people hugging. And that was going to be a value for brands going forward. So Sir Ronald and I, for example, are on the board together of an Israeli company called Rise Up, which has tackled, I'm sure he told you about it, but it's tackling the non-obvious areas of financial services. Like we're going for what's called the 30th to the 80th percentile of socioeconomic levels.
He did not mention it, by the way. He did not mention it.
Okay, so what Rise Up is Rise Up is an AI bot that lives in WhatsApp, connects to your credit card, your bank account, and a couple of other things, and looks at you like a business and tells you your cash flow. Most of us used to getting bank statements, which is not the same thing as cash flow. And this thing lives in there and gives you real-time feedback on your cash flow, how much discretionary spending you have left, how much you don't. Doesn't tell you what to do, but it kind of, flashes yellow, red, and green in front of you with some explanations and emojis to kind of make you aware. And we've managed to move people out of overdraft into savings on an ongoing basis through this interaction. And we launched this, and said, "Oh, that's a nice social good targeting the lower part of the population socioeconomically. No one makes money in those sectors." And we said, "Thank you very much. We think that that'll also be a good investment," which is now proving itself out. We proved that people in these socioeconomic layers will pay us 45 shekels a month, which is about $11, $12 a month as a prime service to get their cash flow, because it helps them out of overdraft and getting out ahead of their skis. So, we've done at Aleph a bunch of investments like this alongside other investments that are in more traditional sectors, from enterprise software to analytics, et cetera. One story I'll share with you because it's highly relevant to Corona. We'd invested in a company called JoyTunes. Any of you use JoyTunes? It's hard to see everybody on my screen, but JoyTunes is now the leading music education app in the world. If you want to learn guitar or piano, you should download it. Well, it turns out we were doing great beforehand. We're doing unbelievably since Corona hit. It turns out that a lot of people want to learn guitar and piano in their confinement time, in their stay at home time. And so, we've invested in a couple of education companies, and those have typically been non-typical sectors for venture capital investment. And we found a lot of success in those areas. It's part of this thesis that the world wants to embrace these brands and these companies. And so that's a word on Aleph. Fundamentally, we invest in Series A companies, early stage investments. We prefer that they have a big technological advantage. It's not always the case. And we also believe, like I said, that these machine learning, machine vision, AI advantages will redound to our benefit. I'll open one parenthesis and then stop for a second for questions. The thing I think we've been most proud of the last 6 weeks or so is, as this Corona ripped through the world, we've got all these companies with all this AI capability, et cetera. We released everybody from their traditional product plans and said, "Hey, if you want to go work on this global problem, you go work on it right now." And a pile of our companies and teams have released kind of unique things for Corona. We have one company that typically does anomaly detection using AI for business. It's called Anodot. They spent a couple of weeks and managed to figure out how you get data out of the serial port of respirators. This is not trivial. This is not in any normal language that we typically read from logs. And now we can remotely monitor anomalies in respirators globally at scale. Another company we just announced right now called Spark Beyond is using its AI. It's helping the government of Argentina come out of Corona, and it's formed a partnership with Microsoft to help governments around the world analyze their corona exposures to their supply chains and a bunch of other things. And that's something we've been super proud of. The companies have really risen to the occasion. It makes us feel like we got the right founders that we backed. I'll pause for questions.
Do you want to open it for real Q&A, or is this
Sure.
going into a part 3?
I'm always happy to stop talking.
No, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. I just want to check in with you. We do have 30 minutes left, so it's up to you.
Why don't I take some questions now, and then I'll have one more part 3 to go into.
Okay. So I'll let people either raise their hand or type them into the chat box. But before we get into that, I want to put 3 classmates on the spot / in the spotlight. On the call today, we do have Tom in the hammock, Caroline Howard, and Toyosi. They are the 3 that are really leading in our class in terms of venture capital. They are leading 2 separate funds, which I'm sure that they'll have many questions about. So that's the first thing that I wanted to do. And the second thing that I wanted to do is I am getting a lot of direct messages about internships in the various offices going into the coronavirus pandemic, and what your opinion is about both employment and if there are any opportunities at Olive. So before we get into part 3, those are my 2 add-ons.
Yeah, Tom, I can't remember who else you said besides Tom.
Caroline Howard, and Toyosi. And if I missed someone, I don't think I did, but those are the 3 that come to mind. And then we have Toyosi actually has his hand raised now. So I'm going to go ahead and give him the first question.
Hi, Michael. Real quick. So you obviously moved from what is Benchmark to ALF. So I guess 2 questions. One, what was the turning point for you in making that transition? And I guess maybe it might help to also give a little bit of color as to you were in Benchmark literally all the while you were in VC prior to ALF. And then the second thing is more around the VC industry more broadly. Obviously, you're seeing, GPs like ALF who are changing the way VC is traditionally done. Do you think that there are tailwinds for that change to occur more broadly in the sector? If not, how do we, and I say we as MBA students, how do we almost like shift the tide to look at investments with a bit less of a pure capitalist view and more of a humanistic view like ALF does?
Okay, so good questions. Quickly on the Benchmark thing, Benchmark decided post 2008, the last crash, that having expanded into the UK and Israel, they didn't really want to continue internationally. They thought that venture capital is best practiced locally. My partner, Peter Fenton, at the time said that the imperial era of venture capital has come to an end. For what it's worth, I'm not sure that Sequoia agrees with that. They just opened up in London, and they're obviously in China and India, and others don't agree with that. Excel is obviously in the UK. Bessemer, I think, is in India and Israel and the US. So, but the Benchmark approach is that venture capital is a locally practiced business and it's a craft business. And I agree with that. I ended up staying, I was kind of the last Mohican of the international strategy and stayed at Benchmark through the end of 2012. I made a bunch of investments out of the then only fund or main fund in Menlo Park while I continued to manage the Israeli portfolio. And my agreement with my amazing partners at Benchmark was that when I was ready to go, I would go and they'd be supportive, and they were amazingly supportive of Aidan and I when we launched Olive. They all invested with us. And I just have nothing but unbelievably great things to say about my partners there and how supportive they were and have been and continue to be. Most often when you see venture capital partnerships go in different directions, it ends with acrimony, and this is exactly the opposite. Just wonderful people. I want to take your question that you asked about venture capital a little more broadly. One of the things I should have mentioned this when we launched Olive that my partner Eden convinced me of, and to be candid, I was kind of humoring him. What was that? If we want to build an equal partnership and we have no associates and no analysts, and there's a lot of reasons for why you do that, We think great entrepreneurs only want to meet people who can write checks. They want to meet a partner. 2, we think that analysts tend to be risk averse, and we want to be risk taking because they don't want to look stupid when they bring it up to a partner. So if we want to scale in any kind of way, we need to build technology to do that. And I go, sure. And he took on basically to build what he called a partner exoskeleton out of software. So at Aleph, we have 6 people full-time on our platform team, 3 squads of a product manager and an engineer, one-on-one, that have basically expanded our capabilities. And he was right, and my skepticism was misplaced. We have 3 teams, one of whom we call the Deal Pod. They work on using what we call human and SIGINT, human intelligence and signal intelligence, on using a lot of software and outreach to look for deals. And we have, there's barely a deal we don't see at this point. The other is called the TAL Pod, which is Talent Pod, which is after scouring for engineering talent and other things. And if you look on LinkedIn, you can see when Corona hit, we launched the antiviral Aleph A-list, which is we just put our team to work to help anybody who lost their job in Corona find interviews and jobs with companies who are hiring. Because we built a pretty cool matching engine to go do that for our internal portfolio use, so we unleashed it on the world for Corona. And then the third one, Deal Pod, Tall Pod, and Sales Pod. Sales Pod mines all the contacts of everybody in our portfolio to find champions and tracks champions at enterprise customers. And then they run innovation seminars also for big enterprise customers globally. And we've been able to generate many millions of dollars of sales for our companies using this cross-referencing. So that's kind of the platform piece of Aleph, and one of the things we did differently. You asked the second question about what you called humanists versus capitalists. And I think for too long, those things have meant the opposites, and I don't think they are. By the way, I consider myself a humanist and a capitalist.
No, I agree 100%.
And I just think, I had a business that I was invested in many years ago that started a really good business. There were a lot of online publishers who were really struggling and free software makers. You may or may not remember, there was a site called download.com, may still exist. It was a place you went to download free utility software. It's really useful, but they had no business model. And in the early days of search, these guys bundled a search bar with these people to enable online publishers to make money. This is it was DoubleClick, but it wasn't kind of sophisticated as programmatic ads are today. So software publishers and content publishers can make some money. Business did amazingly well, but then it became so good that a lot of people got into the business and started making it nefarious. And we started to feel dirty about ourselves in order to compete. So we got out and sold it. Now, if it was capitalist to do this business, but sometimes businesses take turns that you don't want them to take. And the question becomes, when they take turns you don't want them to take, what do you do? Do you say, I got to make money for the sake of making money? It doesn't matter what I do to get there. Or say, I'll take a step back. So we sold the business. Did it mean the business went away? No, the business continued. It meant we got to wake up in the morning and say, okay, we're doing the right thing. We did. And it's not black and white. Life's a lot of gray. And I really credit, the board and the founder for having sold that business. It was the right decision in my view. Wasn't easy. We left it, when I say hundreds of millions of dollars on the table, that wouldn't be an exaggeration. But I think it was the right thing to do. But I think capitalism is the best economic invention ever created. It's raised people out of poverty. It's raised people. It's improved medicine. It's improved everything. Everything in our life is improved because of capitalism. And we should not, just because people have taken advantage of it, we ought to teach them morals and ethics rather than getting rid of the system. One thing's for certain is socialism has failed. So what we need is exactly what you said, which is to inject the morals and ethics. This is what my book's about, by the way. To inject the morals and ethics and the humanity that we all cherish to build a more resilient form of capitalism. And we're one where people take responsibility and don't wait for the damn politicians to come. They're always late anyway.
Fair point. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Toyosi. I'm going to head over to Tom and then Caroline.
I'll find Tom in his hammock again. Where the hell is he? There he is.
Thank you. I have a question. You mentioned Aleph is a partner-only firm. I think there's 3 GPs there, and you mentioned a couple of reasons for that. For those who are on the call who are MBAs and are interested in potentially going into VC in the future, what do you think about in terms of career paths for that? I guess there are a few schools of thoughts in terms of joining a larger firm as an associate versus spending time as an operator, versus some other way of thinking about it. But how do you feel or see the pathway into VC if that's something people are interested in exploring post MBA?
So I'm probably the wrong guy to ask that question to, because I never ever once thought about my career as a path. I didn't even think about it as a career for what it's worth. My personal view on venture capital is it's a set of personality traits, not a set of experiences. So in order to be a venture capital, you need to be at once be super optimistic. You need to have a big belly for failure because you fail a lot, particularly early in your career, and it hurts. You need to be resilient, and you need to be skeptical. You need to be okay saying no 99% of the time and not feeling like a jerk doing it, even if you are a jerk. That requires a set of character traits and personality traits. And it's also a business, that requires unbelievable aggressiveness. It's competitive at once. And 2 is you got to kind of endear yourself to these founders who are the real heroes of the business. And you got to shake a lot of hands, hug a lot of people, turn up in a lot of places. Turning up matters a ton. And it's a hustle business. So it requires a lot of energy on top of it. And those are personality traits. And, the great venture capitalists come out of all sorts of places. Bill Gurley was a, stock analyst on Wall Street. Bruce Dunleavy was a product manager at Intel. Peter Fenton started at Bain Consulting, then went to Excel earlier in his career, and then to Benchmark. Mike Moritz was a journalist. Doug Leone was a sales executive. I'm not sure what Jeremy Levine did before Bessemer. These are the best in the business, these guys. And they don't have one career path. I do think there's I think there's a difference between early stage investing and growth investing for what it's worth. I think in the growth world, there's a lot of reason to try to go to some of these firms like Insight. I'm blanking on all the rest of them right now. They feel like the 800-pound gorilla right now. So, but on the early stage side, and that's more financial engineering, I think, and kind of, sales pipeline processing. Let me see how many deals I can get in. But I think on the early stage side, it almost doesn't matter. You just got to be super curious, meet lots of people. It's a networking game. It's a curiosity game. And that's what I would say.
Before Caroline goes, just for people who are curious, do you feel you have to speak Hebrew to work in venture capital in Israel?
My partner barely speaks Hebrew, Aaron. He moved here. We told him to go to Ulpan, which is where you learn Hebrew. He said, yeah. He didn't go. We said, all right, take a private tutor. He said, yeah, I got it. Like a year later, we said to him, how's the private tutor going? He says, I gave up after 2 lessons. And so my partner, Aiden, decided to punish him and speak only Hebrew to him in meetings. And we think he gets 50% of it.
All right, that answers my question. Good. I'm moving on to Caroline. Caroline, are you there?
Hey there, Caroline here. Thank you so much for your time today. Circling back to your answer to Toyosi's question, particularly around your decision on download.com, how do you defend those types of decisions to your LPs? And I guess you mentioned that your fund specifically has kind of like a good and decent mandate. How do you?
No, we don't. No, wait. I just want to stop you there. We don't have a good and decent mandate. We have a mandate to make money for our LPs. That's our mandate. I just happen to think that making money and doing good goes hand in hand.
Well, so have you ever had a situation, I guess, where it didn't? And you had to kind of choose between one or the other. I guess download.com was kind of an example of that.
The company wasn't download.com. Download.com was an example of a site where software programmers could put up their wares and they were downloaded mostly for free. And we wanted to give those software programmers a business model, the company I was involved with. Look, sure, like I said before, there's always gray, right? And these things are tough in the gray areas. They just are. And there's no one great answer to that. It's very situational, and we all get it wrong along the way. But I think intention matters, and do you examine it properly? That matters. I feel really good about our portfolio at Olive right now and what we're doing. Like I'll give you a funny example, because it's not a good example, but I think it does, kind of stress test it. So we have a company called Fabric Logistics, or Fabric Robotics, which fully automates supermarkets and pharmacies, or almost fully. And we can take a pharmacy that processes 300 orders a day and has got, I'm making up the number, 100 employees, and get it down to 4 employees and a couple hundred robots. That obviously takes a toll on employment. Nothing to talk about. It obviously takes a toll on employment. That doesn't feel like something you don't want to do, though. It feels like automation is coming. You need to automate it. And what we need to think about is, how do we retrain employees? That's a global and national problem that people need to give their attention to. But that's a good investment, not one that I feel any bad about. But it's got side effects, right? But do you think about the problem? What do you do about it? I think that's important. There are others. Thankfully, I've never been convinced to invest in anything gambling, binary options, or anything like that related. So I've stayed clear of all that stuff that, in my mind, is obviously nefarious. But businesses turn, and then you got to figure out what to do. It's not, but you got to think about it.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over now to Balakrishna and then back to Tom.
Hi, Michael. Right, I'm going to take this from the other side of the equation, from the startup side. Obviously, there's been a lot of turmoil in the markets quite recently. I personally, I'm a startup founder. I've been running a cloud kitchen startup for the last 6 months or so, and one thing we've noticed is that there are a lot of business opportunities coming out of coronavirus, but funding, for a lot of reasons, but primarily LPs pulling out of funds, funding has dried up somewhat. So we find ourselves in this interesting position where we've got a lot of client interest, but VC money has basically dried up. So what would your advice be to startups in that position?
Okay, that's a perfect segue into the third part I wanted to get into. Thank you for asking that question. So, important headline about VC. This is perhaps the most lopsided business on the planet. What does that mean? A tiny number of funds, or a tiny percentage of funds, account for the vast majority of returns in this business. An even smaller number of the total companies account for the vast majority of the returns. To use a baseball analogy, because we all want sports to come back, I hope, sometime soon, it's a grand slam home run business. One big outcome makes up for a lot of mistakes, and we all make a lot of mistakes in this business. People always ask me for advice on things. I said, why do you want advice from a guy who doesn't beat a coin flip, right? Which is, 50% of my investments go out of business. So I'm not sure I would take my own advice. But the goal of this business is, we make 10 investments, one of them should return, I'm making up the number, 25x, because it makes up for all the losses. And you want to make sure that you have the most money, the most ownership of the one that makes the biggest return of the most money. So that's kind of one important thing. And there tends to be persistence in the league tables, or the standings of this business. The same firms, more or less, seem to hang around and produce the bigger returns over long periods of time. There is, for whatever reason, a brand effect in this business. That's point one. Point two, there is a lot of money sloshing around there. A lot of venture capital money sloshing around there. However, there are very few venture capitalists right now who've seen a downturn. And I guarantee you, this is my third cycle, third big downturn. I was here for 2000, 08, now this one. Here's what's going on, because I went through it in 2000. Oh my God. I just invested in pilot companies at X valuation, and people can buy a public company with 100 times the revenue at half the price. My portfolio is in deep doo-doo. And people are sitting there going, I made a terrible mistake. I got to triage my portfolio. To your point, Balakrishna, there aren't funds out there who are going to fund my company. I'm going to get a down round, nothing at this price, and the world is ending. And therefore, the vast majority of VCs are in the bunker. So having nothing to do with LPs pulling out, they're in the bunker. And the grenades are blowing up all around them, and they're scared out of their minds. Okay, and they think they're going to lose their job, half of them. So they're rushing to put a tourniquet on these bleeding companies. They're firing people indiscriminately. They're not thinking about tomorrow. I was there. Like, I know this. I did this. There's a great saying in Hebrew, Ein chacham kebal nision. There's no one as smart as somebody who has experience. And I got the battle wounds on this from 2 downturns. And that's what's going on. And since most VCs are new at this game and have come around in the last 10 years, they've never, ever seen a down market. They've seen 10 years of a bull market and SoftBank and big growth funds. And you can just kind of multiply ARR by X and you get a high valuation. That's all they know. And now they're discovering this is an art. You have to fire people. They don't have enough money for 12 months and no one's writing checks. We've been at Aleph like crazy paranoid, because I've been paranoid for over 3 years. Every year at the annual meeting, I keep saying we're tanking up on money because the downturn is coming now. And it didn't come for 3 years. And I look like an idiot for 3 years, but we kept tanking up on money at our portfolio companies, and it came. But most people are not like that. We got asked by 2 of our LPs, how many companies have less than 6 months of cash? The answer in the Aleph portfolio was 0, by the way. But the answer in many portfolios, I think, is probably a third. So there's triage going on. People are in the bunker, and they're not coming out soon, most of them. Some new funds that have no track record probably have LPs pulling out. Why are the LPs pulling out? Very simple reason. They run these portfolio balancing mechanisms. So as long as the stock market's up here, private equity is X percentage of the portfolio. Stock market comes down 20%, private equity has now become a dramatically larger part of the portfolio on a percentage basis. Oops, what can I get out of? Well, I'm not going to get out of the good funds or the ones that have been around, the ones I won't get back into if I pull out. I'll get out of the newbies, all these guys running around chasing deals. So that's what's going on out there. That's the bad news. Here's the good news. The good news is this is the best time ever to start a company. Here's the reason. Number one, and it's going to be painful, by the way, for a year or two, but that creates that kind of huge cauldron, and stress creates the strongest, most focused companies. That's why the great ones are created in these downturns. So one, space is cheaper. Rent's been at an all-time high for commercial office space. It's coming way down for 2 reasons. One is companies are going bankrupt. 2 is people have figured out they can do this. So I don't need all my employees at work. Cost of space is coming down. Cost of people is coming down. Layoffs, salary reductions, people trying to conserve cash, to make sure they don't have 3 or 4 months of cash. Okay, coming down. By the way, I misspoke. We had one company with less than 6 months of cash, but they have a term sheet. So that's number 2. Talent's cheap. Number 3, entire swaths of the economy are getting washed out right now. It's terrible. People are out of work. It's awful. But if you're an entrepreneur, this is opportunity. How do you rethink building a more resilient part of X economy? Maybe cloud kitchens replaces restaurants. I don't know anything about it, but there's swaths of the economy that'll have a hard time getting there because credit's also tight. Despite the U.S. pumping $2 trillion in, this stuff tends to be hoarded for a while until the risk models settle. So if you can get out there, get an innovation, a business model, a technology, there is no better time to start a company because you'll do things super creatively because the world's a mess. And when the world's a mess, the best entrepreneurs thrive. And eventually these things come to an end. They do. the Spanish flu came to an end. World War II came to an end. We don't know when. The Depression came to an end. They come to an end. And, could we have 2, 3, 5, 10 bad years? We could. We really could. But this brings out the smartest, sharpest minds to figure it out. And the bravest, for what it's worth.
Okay, I think part 3 was definitely the mic drop. I'm going to hand it back to Tom to ask one of the last questions. We have some more coming in. So Tom, take it away, and everyone, please gear up your last questions. I am not sure what Michael's afternoon looks like, so please get him in
My dad is giving a lecture in about 5-7 minutes, which I need to be on. So,
okay. Or maybe we should all
7
join.
minutes. Yeah.
All right, good. We have 7 minutes. All right. Tom, take it away.
Sure. I just wanted to ask a little bit. I guess you're an early investor in WeWork, I believe. I'm not sure how involved you were or are still, in the SoftBank era. But I wonder if there were any interesting lessons you took away from their trajectory, from sky-high valuations back to a little bit closer to earth now. That would be interesting for us to hear from someone on the inside.
Yeah. So one is, I think, lessons you want to take away when you're not as close to things happening. It takes time to learn. 2 is valuations always is like the press likes that. The only thing that matters is, whether you're doing the right thing and how much money you get back to your LPs. And I think, one lesson we can certainly say right now, and I wouldn't buy the press terribly much. WeWork is, thankfully a pretty decent business, but is that growing super duper fast when it's capital intensive works when the spigots for capital are open. When they tighten, it gets tougher. That's, I think, an important lesson. I think the second thing is, this is documented at this point, is there are a bunch of acquisitions we probably shouldn't have done. And they're not getting sold off to get the company more focused.
Thanks.
All right. I'm going to hand it off to Ra, class of 19.
So, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry. Hi, Michael. Thank you for a great talk. I guess what my question is, since you've gone through 2 or 3 downturns, I want to understand how a founder would view opportunities back in 2008, and how would it be different viewing opportunities in different, I'm just being industry agnostic now in terms of from a VC's perspective, since you've gone through so many of them in your portfolio and things like that.
Yeah, if I knew that, I'd be an entrepreneur, and and be a real hero. I think this is like it's a combination of passion and problem solving. That entrepreneurs tend to walk around the street and look at every problem and say, "Oh, I can fix that," or "That should be fixed." And I think, this downturn has hit a large part of the service economy. And I wonder what a new resilient service economy looks like. I wonder what a new resilient supply chain looks like. I wonder what a resilient food system looks like. One of the big problems that I'm spending a lot of time on because of an organization I'm involved with is they can't get enough workers to pick the food off the trees in any country in the world. There's an article in The Guardian from last Wednesday which says that the UK is short 90,000 farm workers. I was on the phone with the governor's office in Florida last week. They don't know what the heck they're going to do to pick the watermelons. In Israel, we've had a big problem also. The Thailand workers who normally farm the crops in Israel were away for the new year and didn't make it back because of Corona. So we've been getting volunteers. My organization that I'm involved with brought thousands and thousands of volunteers to pick crops. Yeah. It's like crazy. We've got all these unemployed people, but no one can pick the crops. They're destroying crops. It's ridiculous. We got people starving and no one's picking crops. So I think there's gonna be a lot of stuff around food systems. I think around supply chains, robotics. I think is going to be a big deal, and obviously anything related to remote health is going to become a huge thing. Remote and digital health. I think it already is, but I think it'll be good. And then there's other stuff we can't even see today that somebody's going to have a great idea that says, I can think 10 years ahead of this and figure it out. Like if I was that smart, I would do it. I saw Lisa ask a question and I want to respond to it. I think it's super important. I don't fully understand how she asked the question, something about being a boss lady, but I don't know what that means. Might be because I wear shirts from 35 years ago, but.
Yeah, it just means someone who's, in the industry and successful, really.
It's a regular boss, but a lady.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look.
One that is female.
So, no, we've been searching for another partner already for almost 2 years. When we found Aaron, it took us 20 months. It takes a long time to find a partner. 30% of the candidates have been women, 70% have been men. It's 30% because we've made an effort to go do that. And that tells you a lot, not about us. It tells you a lot about candidate pools right now. And we're at a moment in time where I would say there is a lot of pressure on what they call diversity. And what I say right now is going to be very controversial and politically incorrect. So you'll all excuse me in advance, but I think it's super important.
You're in good company.
We have decided that diversity is either gender or skin color. And I think that's super disrespectful because it says one of two things. It says, I either need to kind of give you a shot and you may or may not be capable of it. And I think that's disrespectful to people and puts them at a disadvantage when they get in. And the second thing it says is that there aren't other kinds of diversity, right? Which is geographic, where you came from. Your culture may be different. You may think about the world differently. And all those are forms of diversity. I'm pretty certain that diversity helps decision-making. I'm also pretty convinced, we used to joke that even though Aiden, my partner, and I look like two white Jewish males from Israel, we couldn't be more different, right? And that is not an answer for how we get women into it. Now, what's the problem? The source of the problem is that there have not been enough women in technology companies historically, because there haven't been enough women or people of color or people from other countries outside of the US, China, India, and Israel in technology. There have been less of those things. And what we need to do is open the funnel at the top and let as many different people in who can bring different perspectives to the table and solve more global problems. And it goes back to the first point I made about entanglement. The more people we get from different parts of the world with different perspectives who think differently, the more problems we're going to solve. And that's what we need. And I think if we lower the tone, you asked about Me Too. The Me Too thing, I think, did create an artificial advancement, you'll excuse the term, and we got more women into venture capital funds. I didn't see a woman other than Sarah Table, who I love at Benchmark, become an equal partner. I think people check the box. And I think that's not okay. Meaning, it's great. Don't misunderstand me. Bring them on. But we need kind of a genuine effort to expand the funnel at the top and get people in. And it's going to take time. But we want people in positions of authority and power who've earned their way there so that they can look at the entrepreneurs and say, I'm here on merit. And there are people like this. We just got to look for them. And not do it quickly, do it thoughtfully. And like I said, it doesn't matter to me. I used to joke, someone asked me, what does the average venture capitalist look like? I told them, I don't know. I don't think there is one. There's no such thing as an average venture capitalist. But we have a problem. The problem is we don't have a big enough funnel. And we need to think holistically and systemically and systematically about this, how to broaden the funnel so that more people get opportunity to get in and get there on merit. And we've taken a long time on this. We're not going to make a marginal decision on anybody because the point is we got to get people there on merit. And we got to get people who think differently and who challenge us. You know, we hired a 26-year-old partner as an equal partner. Trust me, this old guy over here who's almost 49 thinks a lot differently than a 26-year-old. He might have known what boss lady means. I didn't, right? And that also is a form of diversity, age diversity. But we got to get people in who think differently, who challenge what we think. And like I said, it doesn't matter what kind of diversity, we have to get it in. That having been said, there is a particular problem in tech of women and people of color. It is a particular problem that we must solve. And it starts in the education system at the high school level, not at the recruiting level. Too few people are getting out of computer science. Too few people are getting out of engineering. And to the other question you asked, few people are being told you can do this and be an entrepreneur, and that it's okay, and that it won't be a threatening environment, it'll be an embracing environment. And you'll get the same support that everybody else does. And that should be stated explicitly, and people should be held to that. And we should tell women, I tell my daughters, I got 4 daughters, I tell them, you can do this. I have 4 sons also, but I got 4 daughters, and you can do this. And you should think about being an entrepreneur. And you should, not be afraid of it. And if somebody starts up with you, just go back at them. And you're not any less capable than anybody else out there. So I'm a big fan of what you said, but it's going to take time. And you can't microwave these processes. They don't happen overnight. We get bad outcomes, I think, when we microwave the processes. We all want things now. We got used to the microwave. But we got to just do it properly so that it's lasting. Things that, aren't lasting goes back to the same problem that the last guy asked, which is, LPs pull out because they're not that committed at the end of the day, doing it to check a box. That's not okay. Anyway, I got to get on my dad's lecture now, so I'm going to bid you all farewell. Wish everybody be safe, healthy.
Thank you so much.
And
I'm going to
happy
mute
Passover,
everybody.
Easter,
so that
whatever
they
other
can-
holiday.
Thank you.
Thank you very
so
much.
much.
That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Knock
Thank
dead.
you.
Lisa, you can do it.
All right, guys. So you just heard
Bye-bye.
from Michael Eisenberg, co-founder of Aleph VC. Thank you so much for tuning in.